Welcome to my kitchen. I'm going to be making some lemon tarragon chicken salad. And since this is a place I love to be, I thought I would make this chicken salad and we talk about what it looks like when you're often the traumatized person next door, as I've talked about. Basically, there's a combination of sort of shame cycles for who you are alongside your loaded toxic hypervigilance that can be very common in certain childhoods. Especially those where you just never knew what to expect. So they're really what I call good love, bad love. Now, there can be varying degrees of this. You might have gotten 20% of good love and 80% of bad love. But for most of us, there are some parts, some moments, some parts of us that connect to some part of a parent who isn't always unsafe, unkind, unpredictable. It's just that that part of them really dominates our experience and our nervous system. And so basically we end up walking on eggshells with parents like these. So parents like these can have rage cycles and they can be loving and kind, or what feels like loving and kind. They can have, fun vacations with you, and then maybe that's the only time they're great, but then they're not great the rest of the time. Whatever it is, you have never really learned with these parents to internalize like, I'm safe with this parent for the most part. And that is very different from those of us who just never had that safety. And what I think it looks like is a lot of toxic shame and chronic toxic hypervigilance. So a part of us feels really bad about, who we are and never feels good enough. And a part of us feels like at all times, every single person is a threat in some regard. And so it does often look like people who have learned to function in those environments. And so on the outside, they seem fine, but they're not. They often are what I've talked about, as I'm saying, the traumatized person next door. So let's go through, and there's a different bunch of these. I'm going to make videos, combinations of these. And this is really kind of a silent, what I've called silent Cptsd alongside shame, which is also part of Cptsd, and hypervigilance, which is also part of Cptsd, or complex PTSD, which is relational trauma at its core. We often talk about childhood trauma, but it can be adult trauma as well, like being in a narcissistic relationship, an abusive relationship, things like that. But I found that most people who have some form of adult trauma in relationships, especially if they chose really unhealthy partners, often already had a part of their childhood they were starting or trying to heal. But often a lot of the stuff that happened in the adult relationship mirrors a lot of the feelings, even though in the beginning you don't see that. So I'm going to be making my tarragon lemon chicken salad while I'm talking, because I love being in the kitchen, and I feel like, though I won't make all of my videos this way, it really is a way for me to just be more myself. And that is the feedback I've heard from many of you on my last video, so thank you so much for that. Okay, so basically this recipe, just to run it down, is I had a roasted chicken I made last night. We had that with some of the TikTok potatoes with Parmesan. Those are really good. And I made a homemade green goddess dressing, which is amazing, barefoot Contessa. I believe that's the recipe. So I'm just gonna have that in a salad, but I thought we'd just talk about it. So if you wanna know more, I can post, but basically it's from the Simply, I think it's all recipes, something, I don't know, whatever it is, I'll post it down below if you want to find the link. Okay, also really quickly, a roasted chicken is a great way to get multiple meals. I usually make Barefoot Contessa's Mexican chicken soup, which is basically like a tortilla soup, and then I also make chicken salad oftentimes, or we have the chicken one night and we make one of those. Anyway, it's a great way to make a homemade chicken or a roasted chicken you buy at the store, kind of go farther. I find the roasted chickens are often a lot smaller, so like a Ralph's chicken or something like that, even a Trader Joe's chicken seems to go further. All right, so while I'm making this, we're gonna just talk about what it looks like. So the first part is that you're often highly sensitive in general. So basically for you, the world, people, your sensory issues, it just feels like there's a really thin skin between you and the rest of the world. And as a result of that, you're easily triggered by everything, whether, like I'm saying, it's a person's chewing, their breathing, the way they roll their eyes, the sound of the tires I've talked about in the driveway, or the cabinet slamming while the parent has a big sigh. Now, in childhood, that's what it was, but now you take it into adulthood. And so as a result of that, it just feels like you're just, constantly trying to protect yourself from triggers, and often feeling, personally attacked, hurt inside, wounded inside, scared inside, and just sensitive to everything around you. Number 2 is, as a result of that, you often want to numb and hide and avoid your feelings. And so you've learned to over-focus on work or other people or your animals or your hobbies or whatever it is, school. But the goal is to really numb and hide and kind of stuff down those feelings, because it can feel scary to think about, well, what would happen if I let those out? So there's like an active protection to numb. It might be addictions, shopping, whatever it is, binge watching TV, to kind of numb and hide those feelings. But feelings at the core are kind of like intense for you and always there because you're sensitive, but also can feel really scary, especially other people's strong emotions. That's a whole other video, but basically that can feel really dysregulating, and having someone be strongly emotional around you, especially around anger if you've had a more eggshell type childhood. Number 3 is that everything means something, and that is the bottom line. So you overanalyze, overread, overthink, overinterpret, and that goes back to your hypervigilance, because number 1, you being, in that fight or flight helped you pay attention to all the things you needed to pay attention to. And then you applied meaning, like, oh, the parents' driveway, the tires, they were really loud today. They screeched in. They must be in a bad mood. So like I've said in other videos, like, I'll go play them in my room. Or I will make sure all the chores are done as fast as I can. Or I'll make sure I'm not sitting down and relaxing, because if that parent comes in the door and I'm just sitting down, all hell's going to break loose, right? I need to be always doing something. So that can happen. The next thing is, and here's the tarragon I'm using, the next thing is you basically make meaning out of those things, and as a result, the meaning usually goes back to it being something wrong with you. So you are somehow in trouble. That's the next thing. Let me grab a knife. And so, now you've overread, overinterpreted, and it all goes back to you, and you doing something wrong is part of the shame cycle, right? So that goes back to you being bad. The next thing is social situations. I'm just squeezing a lemon right now. Social situations are very triggering in that you feel so sensitive on the inside and outside, and oftentimes we only really feel regulated when we're alone and in our bodies and, just doing our own thing. And so the idea of social situations, regardless of whether you're more introverted or extroverted, can feel really stressful, right? They can feel like, okay, I'm going to go to this thing. I'm going to have to make small talk, which for many of us can be a painful experience. Or the opposite is you don't want to discuss anything deep, so that's also uncomfortable. But basically, you often dread social situations. I'm just adding a little bit of garlic powder now. You want to avoid them, and yet you want to be with other people at times. So you'll say yes to things, and then the closer the thing gets, the event, the more you're like, okay, now I'm adding onion powder. Then you're like, oh, I don't really want to do that. And you'll try to make up excuses, and then maybe you'll finally go. And you'll have a decent time, right, when you're actually there. But there's always a part of you that's like hovering over the head of your head, analyzing what to do with your body and what you said, or what is that conversation about? Are they talking about me, right? There's often like not in a paranoid way, but your hypervigilance keeps you just like exhausted because you're reading everything and yourself and making meaning. And that is why when you get home, you're often depleted and exhausted, and you have really nothing left to give at the end of that. So that's the big part of it. So social situations at the core can be really draining for many reasons. And of course, if you're already introverted or have generalized anxiety, social anxiety, all of that, obviously these can often just really go together. I think can really be the groundwork for where our anxiety can start. The next thing is you have a lot of just shame around your body in general. So when it comes down to it, you're just very harsh in how you see yourself and the lens, how you compare yourself, but you don't really feel good and comfortable and safe in your own body. The next one is you're a chronic worrier, and this is really common because basically you had to worry all the time. And so, you're always thinking the worst case scenarios are going to happen. And when someone that you love goes somewhere, you're worried they're going to crash their car, or there's going to be something bad happening, or they're going to forget to text you, whatever it is, and you're going to get in a fight. So you often worry about everything. Like you preload, you pre-game your worry about everything. And then you kind of often will think about the worst case scenario and then back yourself up to thinking like, okay, what is the worst thing that can happen? Will I be able to handle that? And then you kind of like go from there. So just being in an active state of worry. You're often great at being there for other people and not great at taking care of yourself. So part of what happens is you have this outside-in orientation where you learn to hyper-focus on other people. By the way, this is the mix of lemon juice, mayonnaise, tarragon, salt, pepper, garlic powder, and onion powder that's going to go over the chicken. And so basically you're really great at giving other people empathy and all of that, but receiving it back to yourself, taking care of yourself, a lot of that feels uncomfortable because you've been so wired and prepped to hyper-focus on others. That's that outside-in orientation I talk about so much in terms of more anxious and disorganized attachment patterns. The next thing is, as alongside that, which goes together, is you're often a people pleaser and a caretaker. And because of that, you really don't know what your own needs are. You're really good at being there for others, anticipating their needs, what would they like, what do they love, but when it comes to you, you often don't know what those things are. And that's also why in one of my courses on having borderline or narcissistic parents, one of the exercises is doing identity work. It's like, who am I? What do I love? What do I care about? Oftentimes you've learned to be so in service of others that you don't know who you are. And oftentimes I've found that when we grow up from those childhoods, we want so much to have a different experience that we will literally sacrifice our mind, body, and soul to be a different parent to the point where we lose ourselves completely. Like, let's say I've talked about being a stay-at-home parent or being the best employee, whatever it is, in the service of that. There's a lot of reward, but you sacrifice yourself and then you don't even really know where to begin. And you have a really hard time being honest about that and asking for help. So that's just like, no, never mind. I'll do it myself because it's just too much. It feels like too much, there's too much shame and too much anxiety about asking for help. The next thing is that silence actually can be triggering too. So maybe in your home, when it got quiet, that's when bad things happen. And so that can be maybe you're somebody who actually has a hard time. You want to be alone, but you have to always have the TV on, or you have to have, a podcast going in the background, which I think a lot of us do this. That's not necessarily a pathological thing, but a lot of it is you have to be distracted from that chaos, that worry, and that kind of always feeling bad about yourself on your mind. And so that can be an issue. Basically, you spend your life monitoring everything and everyone. And there's this really thin skin about how you go through the world. And the combination of this always attending to others alongside feeling bad about yourself makes it look like on the outside you're doing really well, right? Because you're a pleaser, you're a doer. Oftentimes when we have anxiety, we can either completely avoid things or we can overdo things. We can become workaholics, and all of this serves to keep us from feeling a lot of those deep wounds and from managing the pain we feel inside. And so at the core, if this is you want to work on things like obviously trauma therapies, on inner child work, reparenting work, books, podcasts, YouTube videos, courses, whatever it is, to learn more and more about what your triggers are, how your body gets into that hypervigilance state and what you can do about it. So learning breathing techniques, self-soothing, cardio, mindfulness, yoga, recognizing in the moment what is happening and soothing yourself through it. And there's a range of therapies. I think it's really important, and I've said this probably not enough, honestly, but whenever I post videos like this, people will say, well, great, okay, so what's the solution? And I just saw a therapist or a psychologist on TikTok yesterday saying the same thing, which is these experiences of healing are very complicated. And so, for example, therapy is about the relationship with your therapist as much as it is about what you're doing in there, from understanding yourself, to understanding your body and your nervous system, to potentially processing trauma, to learning skills and tools, to setting goals and plans. It's so much more than just follow this protocol. But I think it's important to point people in the direction of those things. And there are things you can do on your own. There are a lot of things. It's just that it's not so simple as, okay, I just checked this box. And even in therapy, there's not necessarily that's going to fix everything. People all the time say, yeah, I've done that. It hasn't helped me. So it is a combination, I think, of inner awareness, application in your life, understanding, self-compassion, self-care, inner love and parenting, boundary setting, right? It's complicated. So that's important to know. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. I'll make another video just on what I think is a lot of the common signs of Cptsd in terms of how it really feels from the inside out. And I'll make another video this week, which is a kind of a remake and more in depth of what I call toxic chronic hypervigilance just alone, and how that shows up in your life. And many of the symptoms will overlap with these. So have a great day. I'm going to enjoy my chicken salad and my green goddess dressing on some romaine lettuce, some avocado and tomatoes, something like that. So whatever it is, nourish yourself, nourish your body in whatever form that looks like for you. Just don't forget that if you're suffering like this, you're not alone. But it is going to probably take a combination of things, from the way you think about yourself, understand yourself, and also the way that you set up your life to work on healing some of these wounds. And there will always be, for many of us, some things we don't fully recover from. We just have to learn to not live in them every day. And then the days when we do, we try to find compassion and be like, well, that didn't go well today. I'll try again tomorrow. And just, give yourself that kind of often internalized parenting love that you didn't get in childhood, but that you can now give yourself today, and also create, hopefully, in more loving, connected relationships in our lives. And so that's it. Have a lovely day. Please stay safe and well, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.